Well, good morning, everybody. Melinda gave me kind of an agenda or an outline of what she wanted me to cover with you all. I've kept it somewhat informal, more discussion, and so we can come back to the subjects as we go through. As Melinda mentioned, just keep notes for each section, and glad to go back and revisit it. The market right now, it's even crazier than the last time. In 2007, 2008, different situation, somewhat as far as why prices were rising, but some similarities, but some differences, and we'll touch on that. The first topic that Melinda had suggested was how to prepare the seller and the buyer for the process when it comes to the appraisal. And probably the most important person in this question or item is the seller. First of all, like anything, appearance does matter. As appraisers, generally we look past, so to speak, what's laying around, or I don't know what the right word is, clutter or anything else like that. But, appraisers are human like anybody else. So if a house is quite messy or something like that, it might not provide as much of an impression on that particular appraiser. It really shouldn't matter, though, because we're looking at the bones, the structure, and stuff like that. The other thing that the seller can provide is if you have a house that they've done updating on, especially extensive updating, ask them to put together a list. It doesn't have to be, PDF. They can handwrite it. They could do it as a PDF. Put in the time frames that they've done the updating. People oftentimes will include the costs that were involved, which sort of matters, but not exactly, because it's based on comparable sales. But you still have a good idea of the time frame, because I'm sure all of you see a listing that says newer carpet and on the listing currently, and I go back and I look at the listing from 2 years ago and it says newer carpet. I'm not sure if that's newer carpet. So time frames are good. The more information that we can have as appraisers, the better. The costs are good because it's kind of impressive, when you put out there that somebody just put $100,000 or $100,000 over the past 2 years. It gives an idea to the reader, who would be the lender, why the property has increased in value, or why it's selling for more than other properties in the neighborhood. Let's see, what else would I say? As far as the buyer goes, there's not a lot as far as that goes with to prepare them for the appraisal process, other than, I hate to say it, in this current environment, the appraisal may not come in at the contract price. Many of these listings are selling for over contract price. We can make adjustments for market conditions. We call it time or market conditions. So appreciation, we can do that. You have to have the data to support it. But when the price really goes high, it's hard for us to get there. If it's impossible if you do not have comparable sales that'll support the price. Okay, so how do different loan programs require different review of the property? Nowadays, most lenders, there are exceptions to the rule, but most lenders want the utilities on. The water heater should be lit so that we can check for hot water. Some appraisers will extensively go through and check the systems. I check the systems if the house is vacant. If the house is occupied, I assume that all things are functioning. I often will look at the SPDS if that's provided, either through the listing or with the contract. I'll take a look at that too. That also can give me an idea of what the updating on the property is. When you deal with FHA and VA and USDA, there are some more requirements. And the USDA is slightly different than FHA, but they're fairly similar. When we do an FHA appraisal, we look in the attic, what we call a head and shoulders inspection or observation. We also look at the crawl space if there's one, usually taking a photograph. With FHA, if the property is built prior to 1978, you can, peeling paint will be an issue because of lead-based paint. There are, what FHA is concerned about is what they call the 3 S's: safety, soundness, and sellability. So we will take a closer observation, but that's not to say on a conventional appraisal, if you observe a problem, significantly peeling exterior paint or something like that, that it's not going to be mentioned in the appraisal. But when it comes to the FHA or VA, they will require that particular item be cured or repaired. And that's the main differences. There may be some programs out there that are lender specific that also have requirements similar to FHA. But again, that's lender specific, so I can't say who it is because I haven't run into that lately. So let's see. Next question was, how do I arrive at comps? How do I choose comparable sales? Well, location is always the key. Try to stay in the same neighborhood or market area. And, you try to bracket the comparable sale, bracket the subject property with comparable sales that are a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, a little bit newer, a little bit older. When you're dealing in a neighborhood like Ponderosa Trails, it's easier because there's tends to be more consistency in the age. And just for myself, I usually start at about 10% up and down. So in other words, if it's a 3,000 square foot house, I'll go down to 2,700 and up to 3,300. And usually you want to, say 10 to 12, and sometimes you'll end up with more, other times you'll end up with less, depending on the neighborhood that you're working in, so that you are able to choose. Usually when I go out in the field, I'll have 6 comparable sales that I'll take a look at, and 4 to 6 comparable sales, and then also a couple of listings, because most lenders nowadays want to see at least 1 listing, and we'll include that. And the parameters can be expanded. They can change. I mean, that's the simplest one. I guess the way to search, say, for something in Ponderosa Trails, when you get out into Doney Park and you have something that has a big barn, a guest quarters, in-law, ADU, whatever, you may end up having to widen your parameters significantly, and then do more of a manual selection of the range of comparable sales that you have. Lenders do not like to see across the board adjustments, either up or down. So I'm going to have an example of go over a URL with you. And this particular example had an across the board adjustment for location. And they don't like that. They want to be able to say, oh, I see a comparable sale that backs up to Forest Service, like the subject property. And yes, it did sell for a little bit more than the ones that don't. So I understand that adjustment makes sense. And the same thing with large outbuildings and things like that. They'll always want a comparable sale that has something at least similar or even superior to, say, to the 2,400 square foot barn that the subject property has. And so that's one of the things when you have that feature is you want to have comparable sales that have similar features. Lenders prefer if we have sales within 6 months, all of them, and oftentimes that's not possible. Although the sales, I'd say the market's pretty active. We still don't have that many listings, so we don't have that many sales when you get into a specific size range. So we will search up to a year and sometimes even a little bit beyond that if you were in an outlying area where the number of sales within the past year is very limited. You might even go a little bit farther than that, but the lenders want to see, always want to see sales within a year. Otherwise, they don't like it. So one of the things that Melinda asked me to do was to review an appraisal. Oops, I need to share my screen. Okay. So hopefully you all are seeing that, the URL on your screen. And shake you're good. Okay, Melinda says she's good. So I'm going to see all of you. Good. Okay. All right, so starting up here, when you look at a URL, as you can see, uniform, and forgive me if I'm being too simplistic, I'm not sure. I know I've got a range of experiences observing right now. So URAR, Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, also called the 1004. That's at the bottom. So this is the Fannie Mae 1004 form. And it was modified in March of 2005 to create a form that can be fed into an appraisal program, and the data from this is sucked out of it. It's also reviewed. And so there's different fields that will have pop-ups, and we'll take a look at those. When you look at it on the side, left side, you're going to have a sidebar that tells you what each section covers. So this is your subject property. Pretty self-explanatory. Who the lender is, what our data sources are, if the subject property were under contract, whether we reviewed the appraisal, reviewed the contract, et cetera, et cetera. Down here is the neighborhood. So this could be interesting. And one caveat that I always mention or say that when I'm presenting here, I don't review appraisals, so I don't know how other people present theirs. So my appraisals may not look like other people's. Some people put information in areas that aren't necessarily, they might not be talking about the neighborhood, they may be talking about something else. So when I do the appraisal in the neighborhood section, we always provide boundaries for the particular neighborhood or market area, usually a brief description of the neighborhood. I also have a narrative addendum with a description of the neighborhoods, and then market conditions. And so this area will reflect the comments here under the 1-unit housing trends. You can see here under the 1-unit housing where my cursor is that, it's got the high and the low for the neighborhood. This was taken out of University Heights, so it's going to include everything from condos to the houses. If I do say prices are increasing, I try to show what the rate of increase has been over the past 12 months. And this is for, in this case, I was doing a single family dwelling, a site-built house. And so when I give the percentage increases, it only reflects the site-built house in that neighborhood. And then also, I'll let them know about supply and demand. Why is it in shortage? The way supply and demand is calculated typically is that you look at the number of sales that you've had over the past year. So we're talking about University Heights. This was actually done a couple of years ago, I think. And there were 46 sales over the past year. So if you take 46 and divide it by 12, which my feeble brain can't do off the top of my head, that gives you 3.8 sales per month. And you take that factor of 3.8 and you divide it into 9. So 9, 3.8, and divide. So with 9 listings in University Heights, that indicates only a 2.3 month supply. So what that means is that if there's no more listings after I did this appraisal, there won't be any more houses available in 2.3 months. Typically, demand and supply are considered in balance when you have a 6-month supply. And so that's where we're seeing in most of the neighborhoods now, we're seeing a shortage. So that gives you an idea of how an appraiser will come up with the figures in the neighborhood here. The next section is the site, specific to the subject property, pretty straightforward, what the utilities are, whether it's in a flood zone, whether there's any adverse conditions or anything like that. You know, in Flagstaff, you know, backing to I-40 or 17 or even the railroad isn't exactly an adverse condition because it's accepted. Those locations are accepted in this market area. They may impact value, but it's not really considered an adverse factor. Now, maybe if you back up to an industrial area that's noisy or something like that, that may be something that an appraiser may choose to mention. Also here, if properties in a flood zone A or AE, we'll provide some information about that. The other thing that's mentioned in my appraisals, you can see it says easements, encroachments, et cetera, et cetera. When you have a private street, I will typically include a comment here about whether or not there's a road maintenance agreement and whether or not a private street has an impact on marketability or value. Then here, as you can see from the sidebar, are the improvements. And again, fairly self-explanatory. What's the structure like? Slab, foundation, crawl space, heating, cooling, exterior materials, interior materials, garage. You all have probably seen this. Bed bath count. And then under additional features, I will usually include a brief description of the home, the materials that are used, just to let people know how extensive the vinyl or the wood or different things like that are. And then here's an example. Now here's this isn't the first time we see this, but when I click on this field, you can see that I get a pop-up, okay? So in this pop-up, I have to select what the condition of the property is. So we have 6 different things that we can choose from. If it's a C1, that means it's new. If it's a C2, it could be an older house that's been extensively remodeled or had an addition recently. C3 is typically a house that's been well maintained, adequately maintained based on its age. Then we have a checkbox where we can say whether or not the bathrooms have been updated. And if they had been, that box would not be checked. And then I get another pull down. And then here I can say not updated, updated, remodeled. So I suppose we might talk a little bit. What is updated versus remodeled? Well, updated would be maybe it's got new flooring and appliances, but not counters and cabinets. Or maybe it does have new counters and flooring, but those are the only things that have been updated. You know, remodeled is basically they gutted the thing and redid it. So just so that you know. And then this here is an example of where the subject has given me details about their updating that they did recently and also the costs. Actually, this would probably be a good time. Let me see if I can go to that. I didn't include the list of updating probably because of confidentiality reasons. I use this when lenders want to sample from me. And then any physical deficiencies, adverse conditions. So this would be where this is a standard comment that we have about the utilities we're on and everything is functioning properly. We also, if a property is built before 78, this is where we'll mention that it has, it's built prior to 78 and may have lead-based paint. And also the fact that that doesn't impact marketing. So, all right, so moving on. This is the fun part. The adjustment grid, page 2, the sales comparison approach. So when we do an appraisal for a lender that's doing a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac mortgage, they only rely on the sales comparison approach. That's all they want us to consider. And the cost approach is a factor, but they want to know, they don't want to know what you can build the house for. They want to know what you can sell the house for. And so this is the important thing when it comes to mortgage lending. On the side, you can see the different categories for adjustments. So this particular property did back to, I think it was back to the state land, so that you can see that I have an adjustment here for location. And then you just go down, you can see site size, quality. Now here's where another pull down that we get. And you have everything from Q1 to Q6. Q1 would be the custom home in Forest Highlands, and that they had an architect do the drawing for them, they pick the materials, et cetera, et cetera. Q2 might be a Forest Highlands or Pine Canyon home, but it might be more of a stock home, so to speak. What do I want to say? That can't think of who the builder is. But that's going through the sales office saying Pine Canyon or something like that, or maybe a capstone home in Flag Ranch. Q3 is where we get into more of the more typical houses that we find in Ponderosa Trails, where there are some upgrades, tile flooring, wood, granite, upgraded cabinets and things like that. And then Q4 kind of goes back to your little bit older homes, maybe not as extensive upgraded flooring like tile and wood, maybe vinyl planking, laminate counters, and more average cabinets. So. And we do have, and so you typically included in our appraisal, there is a UAD definition about how we choose these categories. So you can see, for a C4 condition, features minor deferred maintenance and physical depreciation, adequately maintained, requires only minimal repairs. C2, no deferred maintenance, little or no depreciation. Everything's been rehabbed or refinished. So that's how, this is the outline, the guidelines that we use to arrive at the different categories. Here are adjustments for bed and bath. This particular one was, I typically don't adjust for bedrooms, but this one was a little unusual, a 2-bath. And so I did make an adjustment for a bedroom. Just for square footage and other features. So going slightly out of order, excuse me, how do we come up with these adjustments? Well, whether it's location or bath count or bed count, we are supposed to, if possible, to use market data. So meaning if this house had 2 bedrooms, this one had 3, if we had sales, is there a $10,000 difference? Sometimes you can find that through sales, sometimes you can't. The other things that we can do what they call a market survey, which means that an appraiser will be calling realtors and saying, well, how much do you think that the contributory value of only having 2 bedrooms versus 3, or 3 baths versus 2? What do you think that's worth? If you were going to be listing a property, what would you add or take away? We can also go off of what the costs would be to add a feature such as a bedroom or a bath. So that's how we come up with the adjustments. Here for location, sorry, I'm going a little out of order. Again, it would be based on comparing sales. If you have vacant land, that's the best thing. But in a developed neighborhood like University Heights, we typically don't. And so we'll try to find similar sales, some sales that back to undeveloped land and some that don't, to be able to arrive at this adjustment. And same thing could happen. We can do a market survey, not a cost approach, of course. One thing that comes up is the adjustment for living area. And one of my favorite things to talk about that I dislike is price per square foot. Why don't I like price per square foot? Well, here's why. You got 3 houses that are relatively close in living area, and you've got a price per square foot range of about $36 from top to bottom. Now, a larger house will tend to sell for a little bit less than a smaller house. However, that's a pretty big range. So price per square foot lumps way too many factors together. Location, updating, the name of Ratterman is you take the price per square foot of your comparable sales, add these 3 together, divide them by 3. So if you've got 262, 251, and I'm around to 223, so that's 474. Divide that by 3, so that's a mistake. Let me try that again. Understand. So you take that average and then you multiply that average by 0.3. So the average is 245, and you multiply that by 0.3 or 1/3. So that indicates that the price per square foot, the adjustment for the difference in living area would be adjusted at $74, give or take, per difference. Another way to do it that I prefer, because even doing the Ratterman method, as it's called, it still lumps together a number of factors. And so if you had a sale that had a larger than typical lot, it's going to sell for a higher price per square foot. But when I am able to have a house that's not too old and I develop the cost approach, I'll use the depreciated price per square foot. I'll use about half of that. So here, the price per square foot is 135. It's depreciated about 10%, which is 127 divided by 2. That's $60 a square foot. So that's how I will sometimes arrive at my price per square foot adjustment or living area adjustment, excuse me, I keep saying price per square foot. For myself, I include a narrative addendum. And so with my narrative addendum, I have an introductory paragraph where the comparables are. Sometimes there's more to this paragraph than others. In University Heights, it's usually pretty straightforward. If it's in Donny Park or Parks, I may, and comparables are 20 miles away, I'll have an explanation about why they were used and why the distances are so great. And then I just go through line by line. I'm sorry, I can't separate this with us being on Zoom, but you can just see that, days on market, we'll talk about that, whether, what the average is in the neighborhood. Here, I'll explain why the adjustment is made. Other people will not do that. I've seen people explain their adjustments here under additional comments. I've also, interestingly enough, I do see people explaining their adjustments here. I just like it. I feel it's a little more straightforward for myself on the narrative. I don't have to try and cram something into this small space as far as explanation goes. Let's see. And then this is all standard boilerplate as we're scrolling through. But the most important thing to you all is the sales comparison approach. Sorry if I'm making anybody dizzy. Of course, here's the cost approach. We base this on Marshall and Swift. If I'm doing proposed construction, I will go off of the builder's cost breakdown. I will often, in almost all cases, I will just check it against Marshall and Swift. Marshall and Swift tends to be pretty good with the typical house, say in Ponderosa Trails or Belmont or something like that. But then when we get into Pine Canyon and the other customs homes, it's not so accurate. And the Marshall and Swift themselves even has a statement in there that it may not reflect the highest quality that's being built. So then again, just standard boilerplate stuff as far as how we deal with it as appraisers. And then of course, instead of scrolling, I'll jump to some stuff. This is an interesting thing. After the last, as I call it, feeding frenzy in 2007 and 2008, Fannie Mae came up with a form that they call the 1004 MC, market conditions. So the numbers that you saw at the top of page 2, so I had 3 comparable listings and I had 15 sales in the search range that I chose to use, will be reflected on the MC. In fact, lenders get quite upset if the MC doesn't match up to what's at the top of page 2. And the MC breaks down the sales over the past year for the first 6-month period from the date I looked at the property, which we call the effective date of the appraisal. And then we have the 2 current quarters. Over here, we indicate the trends. This is not a great form. It works in neighborhoods like University Heights to a certain extent, or Ponderosa Trails. But when you get into some of the wide-ranging neighborhoods like Donny Park and stuff like that, it can be a little difficult to interpret the data here. But to give you an idea, here, what did we have? We had 6 sales in the first 6 months. So if if you were to review this extensively, and you're saying, oh, it's increasing, well, you want to add the second 2 quarters together. So that's why it's increasing. These, you want to do an average. Actually, it would be a weighted average. Again, that's why it's increasing. But the important thing perhaps for you all is this right here, median comparable sale price. And so here's your median price in the first 6 months. And then you can take the weighted average of the sales in the second quarter. And if you wonder what I mean by weighted average, you've got 9 sales total. You got 3 in the first quarter, so that would be, I think it'd be 30% or 33%. That would be multiplied by this. This would be 0.67. The 2 would be added together, and I'm sure it would indicate that there's increasing prices. I believe that they started using this form because a lot of people, appraisers, lenders, Fannie Mae, everybody else like that, didn't notice a trend that was starting to happen at the end of 2006, 2007, where all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but the number of listings started to go up and the days on market started to go up. And had I been, I guess, if you will, paying a little closer attention, that might have indicated to me that the market was slowing down. And because the listings were languishing on the market longer, days on market were longer. And you know, a 6-month time frame is pretty short to look for as far as a value trend, but nonetheless, it could be an indicator that something's going on. So that's your 1004C. Here we provide some analysis and comments about the market, concessions and stuff like that. There's another form. This is something that we include as far as being appraisers that are required from us. So, and then of course, photos, maps, etc. And that is the URAR. Okay, and that actually covers, I think, the next question or item, which was how to understand and read reports. Okay, now, if you were to review an appraisal and you had some questions, you technically can talk to the appraiser directly. You can't, however, talk about value. You cannot talk to us about value. That was low, that was high. It should have come in at 600,000 instead of 575. That you cannot talk to an appraiser about. But if you had a question when you were reviewing it in the improvement section, where you're like, well, my house is better than average and it should be a C3, which might have impacted the adjustment that's applied on the adjustment grid, that you can talk to an appraiser about. And so if you were reviewing an appraisal and you see some discrepancies or some errors, you know, you can talk to the appraiser about that. If you have an issue as far as value goes, you need to go through the lender and you contact the lender directly, tell them that you want a reconsideration of value, and then you need to provide to that lender some comparable sales that you think would support the contract price. And you know, they may not, you know, there may be a property that is, I actually had this happen to me once on a refi. The property next door had sold, but it was 50 square feet. It was a small house. It was 50 square feet outside of my search parameters. And I didn't know about it. And so somebody called, you know, I don't know if it was the lender or a realtor, called me up and said, hey, the house next door just sold. Really? Pulled it up. Sure enough, yes, I would use that comparable sale. So, you know, as an appraiser, personally, myself as an appraiser, I'm not offended if somebody comes back and says, hey, here's a comparable sale that I want you to consider. Now, if you're talking about a University Heights house, as we are here, and it's like, hey, let's count this with Pine Canyon, yeah, maybe not. okay? But, you know, that's the process for a reconsideration of value. Okay. All right, my insight and perspective on previous market and this year's market. Well, let's see. So the previous market, the previous feeding frenzy, well, you know, lending standards were pretty loose, very loose. You know, as they said, if you could fog a mirror, you could get a loan. And interest rates were low, which were driving prices up because the lower the interest rate, the more people can afford to pay and the more sellers can afford to charge. And so things got pretty loose. And so a lot of people that were neophyte investors started buying investment properties in various locations like Ponderosa Trails and stuff like that, with the idea that, oh, I'm going to flip this in 6 months and make 10%, that kind of situation. You also had at that time, people were getting interest-only loans, and they could qualify. This is an interesting thing, and if there's a lender online, they may correct me, but back then, the lenders weren't qualifying people based on the highest payment on an adjustable rate mortgage, or what an interest-only loan would change to once the interest-only period was done. And they weren't doing that. And so that was another factor, because when people started having difficulties, or you know, the loan started to adjust, all of a sudden their payments went up. And you know, the theory that, oh, you can always refi. Well, no, not necessarily. If your income has changed, if your value's not there, you know, your loan to value isn't there, you may not be able to refi. And so now I believe under current lending standards, they have to qualify for the maximum payment if they're going to be doing an adjustable rate mortgage. And another factor was that there was quite a bit of inventory at that time. Maybe not so much in Flagstaff, but I did look back at some of my appraisals from that time, and inventory was going up. But I think in Phoenix, there was something like a 2 or 3 year supply of new housing in the Phoenix metropolitan area. So you had a number of factors that were involved. So you had interest rates and an active market, lots of buyers out there that were driving prices up. But then things started to slow down, appreciation started to slow down, and then some other factors like the derivatives and stuff like that started making lenders pull back, and they weren't making loans as easily as they did before. So now you didn't have as many buyers, and then we had an oversupply. Well, you all know how it works, supply and demand. The more supply that you have versus the demand, if there's more supply than there is demand, prices are going to go down. And as the lenders tightened and tightened their requirements, prices, you know, the number of sales went down and prices started to decline. Then we started getting into a recession with people losing jobs and stuff like that. And so then houses started, falling into foreclosure. So that's, let's say, after 2008. And then, mortgage companies, Fannie Mae, banks ended up taking back lots of properties. And they don't like to have properties on their books. That's an non-performing asset. And so that's why we see foreclosures sell for such a low price typically. The bank is just like, we need to get this off our books. Let's just get it sold. We'll take the loss. We can write it off, and let's just get it gone. And that, of course, impacts the prices of non-distressed sales. And so that's what led to some of the factors that led to the crash and decline that happened back in 07, 08. Currently, we have, on the mortgage side of it, lending standards haven't loosened up, but mortgage rates are very low, as we all know, historically low. And so a lot more, more people can qualify. Prices are being driven up. And so that's one thing. We got lots of buyers that can get cheap loans. But one of the other things is that supply. After 07, 08, from what I've observed in Flagstaff, developers, builders don't build a lot of spec homes. They may build a couple of models, and then a buyer shows up and says, "Oh, I want model B," and model B goes on these 3 lots. You choose those. Okay, go get a mortgage, and we'll start building the house for you. So we don't have the supply that we had before. And of course, this has been a problem in Flagstaff for a number of years, is that we just don't have the supply to keep up with the demand. And at this point, you've got Timber Sky that's come online, that's good. But, in perspective to the whole Flagstaff area, that's not that many lots. You've got Belmont and trying to think of any of the other new developments. And then you have some stuff out in Doney Park. But if you look at the overall market, it's not a huge supply of vacant lots of new homes that may be coming onto the market at this point. And a number of the subdivisions, they're even doing pre-sales on, they haven't started the offsites yet. So when those homes will be available, it's an unknown. So I think that as long as the mortgage rates stay low and lenders are willing to lend, and the supply stays low, the prices are going to stay high. One factor also that's very different than back in 07, 08 is the Airbnb VRBO factor. I don't think we had the volume of buyers that are doing that right now as we did in 07, 08. It's become more of a trend over the past 10 to 12 years. And so, buyers are coming up here and they're looking at a single family dwelling as an Airbnb as a profit machine, as an income property. And that's taking a lot of housing out of the supply side of things. And unfortunately, it's also taking housing out of the rental side of things. So it's definitely a bummer for our market. So that is what I have to say so far. And so I'd be glad to entertain any questions you all have. I can leave the URL up here if you all have some questions on that, or just answer your questions to the best of my ability that you have.
Mark, I got actually 4 questions going over your presentation. Number 1, do underwriters look carefully at improvements on homes? Let's say in Coconino Estates, you have a home that somebody has, done extensive improvements versus one where maybe they put in a new furnace, new roof as needed, but it's not, the house is significantly the same as it was when it was built in the 60s.
Yeah, definitely. It makes a difference. So if we go back, what we were talking about on the URAR, here in the description of the improvements, this is where, where we'll support the adjustments that we have on this side. So if your subject property had been extensively remodeled, and if I had to use the sale that, the comparable sale that hadn't had any updating, yes, there would definitely be an adjustment there. And as an underwriter's looking at, say, a $15,000 adjustment for quality, or in this case, this one had 10. But if the subject was superior, of course, it'd be a positive adjustment. Then they'd go, well, wait, why did the appraiser adjust this thing upward $50,000? I would believe that they'd go back to the improvement section. They go, oh, because it's been extensively remodeled.
Excellent. Question number two, on some Facebook real estate sites, a strategy some listing agents are using is once they have an offer accepted, and it's above the list price, they actually adjust the listed price in the MLS system to the offer price. So if you get 20,000 over your list price, they do a price adjustment in the MLS, so it comes in at the contract price. Would you as an appraiser know that that was going on?
Yes, perhaps. When I'm not going to open it up because you all know how the MLS works, but on the MLS, I can look at the history and I can look at the days on market, and I can see when the list price was adjusted. And in fact, with that question, that's actually, yeah, top of page 1, under in the first section here where it has the subject, right here, report data sources used, offering price and dates. So this one was a refi that I did, okay? But let's see if I have a pull down. Here's an example of a sale. Let me get let me get the pull down to go away. So listing info is in. The subject was listed on such a date for 200,000. The listing was canceled, with no price change. Okay, so that might have been involved. That might have involved a refi. Let me see if I can find something else. So we do know about that.
Okay, because these guys are they're trying to frame this in these sites as a way to kind of pull one over on the appraisers regarding it selling for above what the list price started out as. So I'm glad you guys are on top of that. Question number 3, can we get access to your queue and condition definitions? I mean, just those alone. So we can go into a home and look at it and tell somebody, this is why your home is not going to appraise for, at the highest level because of, this is the conditions that the appraisers are looking for. Is there a way to get a copy of just that part of the appraisal?
Yeah, you can probably get this off of the Fannie Mae website if you go to it. But yeah, I can provide you with that. And, sometimes when you read these definitions, again, sorry if I'm making anybody dizzy, but if you read some of these definitions, you look and you go, man, there's not that much difference between a Q3 and a Q4. So there's definitely some subjectivity there. So,
okay,
but,
and
yeah, we can see about getting that to you.
The last question is, are homes that are used, let's say they've been used for the last couple of years as an Airbnb or VRBO, are they going to be appraised in a residential neighborhood, Coconino Estates or Cheshire? Are they going to be appraised differently than an owner-occupied property?
Nope. All appraisals, and this goes whether we're talking about Fannie Mae, mortgage lending appraisals. I do a lot of non-lending work, and by the way, thank you to y'all that send me referrals for that. I do appraisals for divorces, I do appraisals for trusts, and I tell the people when I do appraisals, they're all done the same way. It's based on the theory of substitution, based on what's selling for in the neighborhood. And an Airbnb, if it's in the equivalent condition to everything else in the neighborhood, it's going to be appraised as a single family dwelling. We Fannie Mae is not going to be interested in the income that it generates. And that's one of the interesting things, because I sometimes have seen where it's like, something's selling very high. And I'll talk to the agent about it, and it's like, oh, well, that's because, it's generating $40,000 a year in income. So they're kind of looking to buy it from a different standpoint than your typical residential buyer. And that's not something that we're appraising. We're not appraising it based on its income potential.
Great, because that's what is happening in some areas. They're saying not 40,000, but they're saying, hey, look, this is a popular Airbnb property. I'm making $150,000 a year off of it, just renting it out on the weekends and, holiday weeks. And so it should sell for more than another home in the same neighborhood that's been owner occupied that same period of time. So
Yeah, and that could very well be true. Again, people are looking for, let's call it secure, stable investments, so to speak, real estate being one of them, although we've seen it go down, being one of the more stable investments. But again, they're not looking at it from the aspect of, Joe and Mary Sample, as we're doing here. They're looking at it from an income standpoint. And if they think it's, then they might be good, then they're not necessarily going to get $600,000 based on a residential appraisal. Maybe you could prove it's worth $600,000 if you did a business appraisal, an income appraisal.
see, and that's what some of these people are trying to do. They're trying to impose cap rates on residential properties for evaluation, and you try to.
And again, Fannie Mae doesn't care if they're trying to get a Fannie Mae loan. Fannie Mae doesn't care about cap rate. They need to, if they're going to go at it from that direction, then they need to talk to a business bank or something like that, in my opinion.
Thank you much. You are the man.
Hey, one thing I wanted to go back to about the contract. So, because, we do get the contract, we do analyze it. And one of the interesting things, one of the things for us as appraisers is that we're not supposed to be appraising based on a predetermined value. So that was one of the things that also happened in 07, 08, is that lenders, mortgage, actually it was on the form, they'd say estimated value 450. And some appraisers took that as being the number that they had to hit. And no bueno. And so you could also consider a contract price being a predetermined value. Yes, I don't disagree with that. However, how can we avoid it? I have heard there are some states that they don't give the contract to the appraiser. But so the contract price has some relevance. But when I'm choosing comparable sales, I know what the contract price is, but I am not choosing sales based on that contract price. I am choosing comparable sales based on features. As I said, location, living area, age, bath count, bed count, what's on the sales grid. And if you pull your comparable sales, and let's see back, what did I appraise this for? So this came in, let's say for instance, this was under contract for 450 back when I did this appraisal. And I start looking at my comparable sales here, you can see, it's like, boy, it might not come in at 450. What's special about this house? Is there something going on? And you may find that out when you go for your site visit, and you may find out from the listing agent before or after. And it may be a factor that could contribute to it coming in at 450, or it might not, kind of like what you were talking about the Airbnb thing, And so the contract price is important, but we don't appraise based on the contract price. We appraise based on the subject property's features. Anybody else?
On that note, since you're there, my question is if you could explain a little bit as far as, I know you had mentioned, we try to stay 10, maybe 12% in that square footage. But what are the max percentage that you use for the criteria without going outside of that criteria to use for those comps?
You mean how big a range would I mean?
Right, because I've heard that no more than 20% will they consider. I know 10% trying to be as close as possible, but what range do you typically stay or not go beyond?
It just depends. It really does. I mean, if you get a range that's too big, again, looking at the URA here, you can see that the adjustments are relatively, mild compared to the sales prices. So let's say, for instance, I don't know why, but you'd use a 1,000 square foot house. I'm not sure why you would, but I wouldn't, because you'd end up with about in this case, a $30,000 adjustment, which is really high relative to a $380,000 sale price. I can't answer that question definitively because it just depends. I might have to use 1,000 square foot sale because it's the only one that I happen to have in, park somewhere.
Right.
And, Fannie Mae guidelines, they typically want line items. So that's this adjustment or this adjustment. They want those to be within 10% of the sale price or no greater. And then you see at the bottom here of the column, you have net adjustments and gross adjustments. And so their guidelines here are no more than 25% gross of the unadjusted sale price and no more than 15% of the unadjusted sale price. But these are only guidelines. I do exceed them quite often in high-end properties because I can have an adjustment in Pine Canyon for golf course versus non-golf course that's significant. So I hope that answered the question.
It does. It certainly helps. And then if you could explain kind of where you come up with the figures for the Radimer method, and I'm familiar with that. I think that's what I use because I feel like that's kind of a good, easy math to utilize and helping give us a range for that. But also as far as, some appraisers don't do bedrooms, they'll just do square footage, and some will do both with that. And I know you can't shed light on why appraisers do different things. And sometimes it kind of, to me, is an oxymoron when they call it a uniform appraisal because people are using different methods sometimes as far as how they're arriving and what they're utilizing for that data. But if you could touch a little bit as far as, in fact, one of the questions was how much the lot value goes on. I know you explained looking at vacant land sales is a great way to do that, but maybe a little bit more touch on the lot size and how much does that lot size factor into what that difference in lot value is going to be if it is on a golf course or back in state land, and maybe some of those differences and how you're able to calculate those.
Okay. Myself, I'm one of those people that typically does not adjust for bedrooms. Of course, this has to be an exception to the rule because I feel that it is accounted for under the living area adjustment or square footage adjustment. What we try to do though is when in this instance for a bedroom adjustment, I believe I was able to find it, even a historical sale, maybe more than a year back, where I was able to find a 2-bedroom house and compare it to a fairly similar 3-bedroom house to be able to see if there's a value difference, a price difference. And that's how we're supposed to come up with the adjustment. If an underwriter calls you up and says, well, how'd you come up with $10,000? And you're like, well, I just think that's what it's worth. That's not going to fly. And then the other thing, again, we could do a survey, market survey and talk to realtors and property managers and stuff like that. So that's the bedrooms. Garage, again, when it comes to garages, you just try to do a match, what we call a match pair analysis. To you want two or three sales to compare that only have like one or two differences, where you can isolate why there's a value difference. But it's difficult, very difficult in Flagstaff, because we have so much variation in updating and quality and stuff like that. As far as location or lot size goes, land sales are the best. And, you can even, you can go back. One of the things that I've done in the past to find out what the location adjustment is for backing to the golf course, using that as an example, is I might go back 2 or 3 years, and until I go back far enough sometimes to finally find some sales, maybe land sales, a golf course and a non-golf course, compare what their price difference was, and then adjust that for time. And so if there was a $20,000 difference in, I don't know, let's say I had to go back to 2018, there's a $20,000 difference, then I might, factor in, about a 30% appreciation over the past 3 years. And I'd say, backing to the golf course is worth about $25,000. But again, the best thing is if you have market sales, that you can say, these two are similar. This one is on the golf course and sold for more. There you go. That's the best.
Great, thank you.
Would that apply to corner lots versus infield lots as well?
It could. That's a tough one. I mean, I think corner, I can't tell you if they're worth more or not. It's very difficult. And just because, there's not that many sales out there. Definitely helps with, it can help with selling the property, but I don't know if it adds a lot of value or not.
Great. We've got a few questions here in the chat box, so I'll just read those off. And if y'all have other questions, feel free to type those in, or we can, after we finish these, unmute yourself and ask questions so that we can address those. But the first one is, Marina had, does the lot size make a big difference in the price? And I know you touched on that a little bit. Was there, to answer that specifically, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Again, you have to look at sales, comparable sales. Site size sometimes makes a difference, sometimes it doesn't. The difficult thing with appraising is I rarely can give you a definitive answer. But you would look and compare sales, see if you can go back and look at even historical lot sales that have size differences. I think a larger lot probably does have an impact on value. However, there are some exceptions to that, because you can end up, I'm trying to look here. Sometimes you can have a lot, like for instance, I don't know where this one is, 1457 University Heights Drive South. If I had to guess, that one I think might have backed up to the freeway. So there's an example of some. So anyways, excuse me, I got it. So you might have a larger lot that have factors that diminish the value of that additional site size. So one of them, as I was looking at, might be that you're backing up to I-40. The other thing might be you're on, I think it's Sherrill in University Heights, the ones that back up to the school. They're all downsloping lots and they're larger than typical. That's great, but you got a downsloping lot and you're going to be adding to your construction costs because of the grade of that lot. And another factor that may be is that you're on a cul-de-sac and you've got this weird shaped lot. And so you're really not going to end up using that extra area you have because it's kind of weird, it's away from the house and it's not really usable. So.
That helps. Great. And then the next one, was, can you go into the process for extra processes for VA loans, which is a good question. I think in regards to kind of preparing our sellers, or as we go and we evaluate a home to get it ready for the listing and kind of see some of those complexities, there are some homes that are just not going to make a VA or FHA loan. Can you talk about some of those things that a seller can do to get their home VA or FHA worthy?
If it's again, remember the 3 S's: safety, soundness, and sellability. Okay. So the safety aspect would be if you have peeling paint, and that's inside or outside. If the house is built prior to 1978, you want to get that taken care of. It's best if you can match, it might be just the fascia on a particular area on the exterior. Put a drop cloth down so that the scrapings end up in the trash, and then paint it, try and match the color, but it doesn't really matter if you throw a primer on it. At least it's not peeling paint. If you do that before you're listing, then it might not look that attractive. The thing about lead-based paint, what they found is that it typically impacts children. It impacts children the most, because if I understand correctly, lead paint tastes a little bit sweet. So if a little kid's playing around outside and they find flaking paint, they'll start eating it. And the other thing is that paint after a while will start to chalk. If you know what I mean, you rub your hand on something, you look, and it looks like chalk. Well, that's your paint is oxidizing, deteriorating. Well, that chalking, that dust ends up on the floor, and the kids are crawling on the floor. So that's what the big bugaboo is about lead-based paint. If you have a home that has wood to earth contact, so in other words, typically your siding comes down and the foundation is about 6 or 8 inches before the grade of the earth, that's good. But if for whatever reason earth has been pushed up and now the dirt is contacting your siding, that is an entry point for infestation. So you want to take a shovel, whatever you do, excavate that out so that you don't have wood to earth contact. Now the exception is like on a deck or something like that. If you have pressure treated lumber or treated lumber, wood to earth contact is okay, but we'd have to know that it's that type of wood. The other, let's see, FHA heat source. You need to have a heat source in all the bedrooms for FHA. So it's and it needs to be, if you're on electric heat, you need to have a hardwired electric baseboard in the room. Although you can have an exception to that rule if you have an older home. If you have, say, a gap at the bottom of the door and a transom vent, a vent above the door that allows a free exchange of air so that the room doesn't get too cold. Again, the idea being a small child gets locked in there and freezes to death, I guess, or an elderly person or something like that. That can also be acceptable. Let's see what else. Windows are supposed to operate properly. So that means they open and close and they lock. Most appraisers probably don't check every single window in a house, but they are supposed to check a few when they're doing an FHA or VA appraisal. If you have a broken window, that can be a concern, whether it's double pane or single pane, because I've actually had this happen where you have a broken window and you slide it open and it slams and that pane falls out. And so that's something to be concerned about.
But the attic and the crawl space, you're taking photos of those things. What are specifically noted in those areas?
Mostly what you're doing is you're looking in there to see if there's perhaps some type of bioorganic growth on the underside of the roof. Does it smell musty? Is there insulation? That be the attic. in the crawl space, it would be, is there any standing water? Does it smell musty? And is there adequate space to crawl around under there? That would be the crawl space.
Okay. And so in general, looking for that bioorganic growth, when you're going through the house, you're looking for that possibly in the shower and other wet areas as well. If there's a spa indoors, verifying that maybe that's not an issue in the other rooms.
I might bring it up if I've observed it, but I'm not, anything that I'm not an expert in, I will refer to somebody else.
Okay.
You know, and I won't call it the dreaded M word, because there are some stuff out there that is just fine. That's normal bioorganic growth, and it's not harmful. But if it was so significant, you know, which we've all seen it probably, you know, then I would definitely bring it up. And so, you know, if you have something like that in a bathroom, clean it, you know, or scrape it off and paint it. You know, I think they make paint for that specifically.
How about the roof? Concerns about the roof? How bad can a roof be and still pass for VA and FHA?
I think we lost him.
Okay, am I the only one? I thought,
If I remember, if I was doing FHA certified, that it's got 2 years left.
so I apologize. I think your internet paused. I thought maybe it was on my end, but you were gone for about 10 or 15 seconds there.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, for some reason my connection is unstable today, and it's usually super solid. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was
So if you could
saying
repeat
that. Okay, so when it comes to a roof, you have 2 years remaining life.
Okay.
So if you're if it's cupped or curled, you can, or you look at it and you can just tell that it's real old and it's missing some shingles. I just would have a qualified person certify that it has 2 years remaining life.
Okay. Marina, does that help kind of cover some of the questions, concerns that you had for VA process, VA loans?
And I'm not a VA appraiser.
Okay.
I'm an FHA appraiser, so there may be some subtle differences that I don't know.
Sure. And then Kim asked a question, what are you averaging for a turnaround time?
Sorry. It's pretty ridiculous. I'm running 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, so take this, realtors, that if you're not already putting in your contracts that the buyer is to order their appraisal within a quick time frame, sometimes within 1 day or 3 days is typically what I put in mind if we're going to do Brevin financing, to ensure that that appraisal gets ordered so that we can help prevent some of those delays. Any other suggestions, Mark, in regards to that?
No, I just, you know, we're all very busy. I know there are some appraisers that aren't as far out as I, but you know, I like I say, I do a lot of non-lending work, and so I get pretty backed up. But you know, the timeframes aren't quite as critical for non-lending, and in most cases refis too. It's just one of those things. The lenders will take care of that as far as your due dates go, because I know that there are some people out there that can meet the due dates, perhaps, you know, but right now it's tough for me.
No time for skiing?
I haven't skied yet, other than cross-country skiing. So I'm hoping to get going next week. I get my second shot on Friday. So
nice. All right. And then I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Padriak McGarry. If properties in the same development area with same size, in parentheses townhouse, sold for increased price over 4-month period, would you use average increase in value over time to get to a third property in the same development?
not sure I understand the question, but I could use, if I did have 2 sales, you know, one that, and townhouses are great for match pairs. That's probably about one of the fewest things that we can have as far as match pairs. And so if you did have a sale 4 months ago at 360 and another sale at 400, you know, that would be an indication of increasing prices, but that would be only one sample. And so you may try to find others, and that would be, of course, would be a significant adjustment to, say, to a dated sale that sold, say, 8 months ago, but it would give you support for that adjustment.
Thank you.
I hope that answered his question.
Did I help? Did that answer your question? Did we explain that correctly? And feel free to unmute yourself if you need to, and at least let me know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Okay. Pedrick, we don't hear you, so. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, if you sold a townhome in, August, 300,000, October, 350, and then you're looking at that same unit for this month, would you equate the value that it's rising over that period of time, basically price over time to get to that third sellable price?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. It'd definitely be an example of the appreciation, and it could provide, support for your adjustment for market conditions. I'd have to do a little bit more research as far as that goes. I mean, if they were a perfect match pair, that would be market appreciation. But I'd have to find out, did the one that sold for more even 3 months later, did it have other factors that may have increased its sale price?
Yeah, understand. Okay, thank you, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And then Cal McCloy asked, on lot size, we occasionally find homes in Mountain Air, Kachina, and even Continental Country Club where the home is on 2 lots. If there's no chance to sell the additional lots, meaning the home built on both, etc., can you give any general guidance in valuation? Thanks, Cal McCloy.
Yeah, that's something I never recommend to people, to combine lots. If they put the house right on the lot line, or what used to be the lot line between the 2 lots, it's not gonna, again, I have to look at market sales, but it's probably not gonna add significantly to the value of the home. Again, I don't want to say it's not going to, because each situation is individual, but it's probably not going to be, a significant increase like, yay, I've got a whole nother lot. Even in the situation where I've seen the houses on one lot and maybe they're assessed under the same parcel number, but you could easily split off the other lot. A lot of times that extra lot doesn't sell. It sells probably for 50% of what a vacant lot would have sold for. I think, the buyers are kind of like, well, I don't need an extra lot. I don't want to go through the hassle of selling it, so I don't want to pay that much extra for it.
Does that help, Cal, answer your question? Okay, we can't hear you, but hopefully so. And Mr. Tadmore asked, what can we do as agents to help you in preparing an appraisal? Feature list, recent comps, and that you had touched on that earlier as far as providing a list that's been updated and also to indicate the age of those updates and remodel.
Yeah, that's for your subject property, definitely. Let us know what the updating is and different things like that. So that helps. The other factor, the other thing you can do is, I don't have a problem if realtors want to provide the comparable sales that they used. I know most of y'all use CMAs probably. And so, you can just email me the CMA and say, well, these are the things that I use to come up with the list price. And that would be helpful too.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Tad?
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
All right.
You're welcome.
Great. I don't see anything else in the chat box. Does anybody else have any other questions that they want to address to Mr. Mark here? We've got about 3 minutes left or so. Look at that. Look how thorough you were, Mark. With 3 minutes to spare.
I just confused everybody.
It is confusing, and that's precisely why we like to have you come on and just kind of break it down, explain to us when we're looking at a report. It can look very Greek, trying to review it with our clients so that they can understand it. So hopefully everybody here today got at least a general knowledge of trying to understand reading an appraisal, what goes into the process as well, how they can vary based on the appraiser sometimes, and how to hope, this helps give us a guide, I think, too, when we are doing our CMAs and trying to understand and think like an appraiser. Of course, a CMA is never, ever an appraisal, but to help think so that we can prepare our clients and understand the market a little bit better. And it's tricky sometimes doing those evaluations. And so this, for me anyway, helps help us understand those evaluations and prepare us, even though we're in a crazy market right now, where today it seems like these adjustments make sense, and then tomorrow it's just completely a different story. So is there anything else, Mark, that you feel we can do as agents, or that would help your job, or any advice you want to give to us and to our clients?
No, I mean, everybody, in most cases that I've seen, you understand it. It's just one of those things, like I had mentioned, when you have your CMA, I know we get into these situations where stuff sells for more than the list price, and if you're looking at your CMA and it's indicating 500,000 for the subject property based on, or you're going to list it for 525 and you're figuring it's going to sell for 500, and then it ends up under contract at 575. That there's a good possibility that it may not appraise. And I'm not going to say yes or no, it will or won't. Depends on depends on the situation. But let's just say there's a probability that, if your CMA is indicating 500 or 525 and you got a contract price of 575, it's probably not going to appraise. Buyers can pay more than the appraisal, as we all are aware. If it's cash, if they think it's worth it. And, sometimes I put that comment in there, maybe it's worth what they're willing to pay for it, but I do not have comparable sales that'll support that contract price.
Probably writing that in a lot more so than ever before, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I think, was there anything else anybody had to question or to comment on? Mark, again, thank you so much for being here today. It's so enlightening. Really appreciate your time reviewing with us. And for those of you that want a little bit more understanding about how to do CMAs, we've got our pricing strategy advisor course coming up on April 20th, 4/20. So put that in your date. Go ahead and register at the Northern Arizona Association of Realtors website. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself as the professional development chair, or to your association. So thank you all so much for being here.
May I add one thing?
Sure, absolutely.
I just thought of something, because this morning I was doing an appraisal, and it's sold. I'm going back in after it was purchased about 6 months ago, and so I had the previous listing, and this particular property was entered as 4 comps only, which is great. Fine. You guys found a FSBO, you got it under contract, you put it into the system. That is helpful. It's very, very helpful. It's another sale that we have that's easy to find, because I do check the county websites too, but they're the county parcel viewer for sales in the neighborhood, but they aren't necessarily as up to date as you'd like. But when you all put in for comps only, give us some information. 99% of the times it just says 4 comps only. Maybe we've got the square footage and the bed bath count. There's nothing about updating or quality or anything, and if you don't want to take the time to provide the description in writing, take photographs and put those in, because they're useful. Because in a lot of cases, what's going to happen for comps only, the appraiser is going to be giving you a call and say, what was this like? And we may actually also give you a call to say, this wasn't even, this was on the market one day. Was it a FSBO that your client found, or was it a pocket listing? Because again, that goes back to page 1, where we have to analyze, its listing. So, but if you can give us some information when it comes to comps only, that would be more helpful.
So true. Thank you. I forgot to put that in there. That is so, and it helps us as agents too. So don't be lazy. Go inside and outside. You represent your client. You help them sell this in one way or the other. Take at least 7 photos. You know, give us a couple of different angles. If updates, absolutely. Kitchen and bathrooms, flooring. Give us some idea, because it's hard to even utilize that comp. And know if it's even justified to use it. And when we have so little to use, every single one counts. So thank you, Mark, for reminding us of that as well. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, again, thank you all for being here. Don't forget about the Pricing Strategy Advisor on April 20th. Get registered for that. It's a fantastic course. Will certainly help, and it'll make sense to put some of this together with what we've seen with Mr. Mark Gard here. And don't forget to utilize him if you need those appraisals. He's wonderful and wonderful to work with. So
Well,
thank
you
you
can
all.
always call if you have a question.
Absolutely. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And Mr. Mark, again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Greatly
Bye now.
appreciate it. Bye, everybody.